Family insulted her at the altar. The Mafia boss interrupted. "She's my bride. Everyone leave now." The morning air in the church dressing room was heavy and cold, thick with the scent of old stone and lilies. Isabel Russo felt the chill of it seep through the silk of her slip, raising goosebumps along her arms. The wedding gown, a Vanderlei heirloom, hung from a hook like a pale, hollow ghost. It was exquisite, crafted from lace so old it was priceless, and it felt utterly wrong. Isabel was a florist. Her hands were used to the grit of soil, the sharp prick of a rose thorn, and the waxy feel of stems. This dress, this day, this entire life, it felt like a costume she was moments from ruining. "Do try to stand still, dear." A voice clipped. Matilda Vanderlei, her future mother-in-law, stood in the doorway, a vision in dove-gray silk. Beside her, Julian's sister, Clarissa, examined Isabel as if she were livestock being judged. "The fit is adequate," Clarissa murmured, her eyes lingering on Isabel's shoulders. "Considering." Matilda's smile was a thin, bloodless line. "It just needs to hold together for a few hours. Try not to fidget. It shows your nerves." The tension from the two women was a physical weight. For weeks they had circled her, their polite words laced with subtle venom. They commented on her simple neighborhood, the way she held her fork, the fact she ran a shop. They made her feel like a smudge of dirt on their perfect porcelain world. Isabel turned back to the mirror, her stomach twisting. She tried to summon Julian's face, the man she was about to marry. All she saw was the blur of a charming smile, a hand that always felt a little too loose in hers. She'd met him 6 months ago, at a charity gala she'd only attended because her small shop, Bloom Bramble, had donated the centerpieces. She'd been adjusting a spray of delphiniums when he approached, all polished charm and expensive teeth. He'd called her refreshingly authentic. Isabel had learned too late that authentic was the word wealthy people used for poor. His pursuit was a whirlwind. He loved the story of it. The blue blood scion finding a real woman, a wildflower among the hothouse orchids of his set. He loved showing her off, loved the way his friends found her quaint. He had pursued her not for love, but for status points. She was his novelty, his brief, manageable rebellion, and she, lonely and dazzled by the attention, had mistaken the performance for affection. Now, the organ music was starting. Matilda and Clarissa glided out, leaving a wake of cold perfume. Isabel was alone. She took a deep breath, clutched her bouquet of simple white freesias, the one thing she had insisted on, and stepped out to meet her future. The cathedral was magnificent, packed with hundreds of people whose names she didn't know. The aisle felt a mile long. At the end of it, Julian stood, looking pale and impossibly handsome in his morning coat. He gave her a tight, practiced smile as she reached his side. The ceremony began, the old words washing over her in a meaningless drone. She felt disconnected, a spectator at her own wedding. They turned to face each other for the vows, the priest, a man who looked as ancient as the stone walls, smiled benevolently. "If any person here can show just cause why this man and this woman may not lawfully be joined together, let them speak now, or else hereafter forever hold their peace." A standard line, a formality, a sharp, feminine voice cut through the sacred silence. "I have just cause." A collective gasp swept the pews. Isabel's blood turned to ice. She turned. Matilda Vanderlei was on her feet, her face a mask of cold indignation. "This arrangement cannot proceed," Matilda announced, her voice echoing perfectly in the vaulted space. Julian froze, his hand dropping from Isabel's. "Mother, what are you doing? Sit down." "I will not," Matilda said, stepping into the aisle. "I will not stand by while this opportunist cements her claws into my son and our family name." She pointed a finger at Isabel. The bouquet in Isabel's hands began to tremble violently. "This girl is trash," Matilda declared. The words hit Isabel like stones. "She comes from nothing. She's a social climber of the lowest order, a common girl who saw a chance and took it. She's unworthy of the Vanderlei name. She's unworthy of breathing this air." The church was utterly silent, save for Matilda's voice. She conveniently forgot to mention her father's gambling debts. Did you know that? Debts our family had to quietly settle to avoid the embarrassment she brought to our doorstep. Isabel swayed. She looked at Julian, her eyes screaming at him. "Say something! Stop this, please, Julian!" Julian looked from his mother to the horrified faces in the crowd. His face was blotchy red. He was not angry. He was embarrassed. Clarissa stood up then, joining her mother. She trapped him. She saw a rich man and spread her legs, just like her mother probably taught her to. A woman in the front pew gasped. "Stop," Isabel whispered, the word lost in the vastness of the church. "This wedding is a farce," Matilda concluded, her voice ringing with triumph. "And we will not allow it." All eyes, hundreds of pairs of eyes, were on Isabel. They were not sympathetic. They were curious, judgmental, hungry. They were watching her execution. She looked at the man she was supposed to marry. "Julian?" Her voice was a cracked, broken thing. Julian Vanderlei straightened his waistcoat. He cleared his throat. He looked at his mother, at the gaping crowd, and then, finally, at her. His eyes were cold, filled with the shame she had caused him. He gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug, an apology for the inconvenience, and then he turned. He stepped down from the altar, straightened his tie, and quietly walked away, disappearing through a side door into the vestry. He left her. He left her alone at the altar, in front of everyone, in the borrowed dress, with the insults hanging in the air like poison gas. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. Isabel stood, paralyzed, her skin burning with a humiliation so profound she thought she might die from it. She could hear the whispers starting, the rustle of clothing as people turned to each other, then a new sound, thud, thud, thud. It was the sound of the massive oak cathedral doors swinging open and hitting the stone stops. The sound was heavy, final, and it cut through the whispering. A murmur ran through the church, different this time, not of gossip, but of fear. Every head turned. A man stood silhouetted in the bright archway. He was dressed in a suit of immaculate, severe black. No flower, no flourish. He was tall, his shoulders broad, and he moved with a stillness that was more menacing than any threat. As he stepped into the light, a name passed through the pews like a cold draft. Marsetti. Damiano Marsetti. Isabel knew the name. Everyone in the city knew the name. It was spoken in hushed tones, a name synonymous with shadow, power, and a kind of justice that had nothing to do with courtrooms. Damiano Marsetti did not look at the crowd. He did not look at the stunned Vanderleys. His gaze found Isabel on the altar, and it locked onto her. His eyes were dark, unreadable, and for the first time that day, she felt she was truly seen. He began to walk down the aisle. His footsteps were silent on the long red runner, but they commanded every atom of air in the room. The guests didn't just move out of his way. They seemed to shrink into their pews. He reached the front, stopping at the foot of the altar. He looked up at her, standing small and broken in her white dress. He looked at Matilda and Clarissa, who stared, mouths agape, their victory suddenly soured. Damiano Marsetti's voice was not loud. It was low, rough, and carried the weight of absolute authority. "She's my bride now." It was not a request. It was a statement of fact. He turned his gaze on the frozen guests. "Everyone leave." No one moved. They were too shocked. Damiano's eyes narrowed, just slightly. The temperature in the church seemed to drop 10 degrees. Now, it was not a suggestion. It was an order. People scrambled. There was a sudden chaos of scraping chairs, rustling silk, and panicked murmurs as the city's elite fled the cathedral like frightened birds. Within 60 seconds, the vast space was empty, save for Isabel, Damiano, and the paralyzed Vanderleys. Damiano ascended the 2 steps to the altar. He stood in front of Isabel, his body a solid shield between her and the family that had just destroyed her. He studied her face, his expression unreadable. Then, in a gesture that was impossibly gentle, he shrugged out of his heavy, expensive suit jacket, the scent of him, like spice, rich tobacco and something metallic and male, washed over her. He draped the jacket over her shoulders. It was huge on her, swallowing her in dark wool, covering the pristine white of the humiliating dress. He held out his hand. Isabel. She stared at his hand. It was strong, calloused, a working man's hand, despite the wealth he commanded. She looked up at his face, at the dark eyes that held no pity, only a fierce, terrifying possessiveness. She placed her trembling, ice-cold hand in his. His grip was immediate, warm, and absolute. He did not tug. He simply held her, anchoring her. He turned and, without a single glance at Matilda or Clarissa, led her down the aisle. He led her out of the cold, silent church and into the blinding sunlight. A black armored sedan was waiting at the curb, not a white limousine. A man with a scarred face held the door open. Damiano guided her inside, sliding in across from her, not beside her. The door shut with a heavy, final thunk, sealing them in dark-tinted, soundproof silence. The car began to move, pulling away smoothly from the curb, leaving the cathedral and her old life behind. For a long moment, Isabel just sat there, clutching the lapels of his jacket, breathing in his scent. The silence in the car was absolute. Then the dam broke. It was not a quiet cry. It was a raw, guttural sob that tore from her chest. The humiliation, the rage, the betrayal, it all came pouring out. She ripped the veil from her hair, the pearls scattering on the floor. He left me, she choked, the words ripping her throat. They said... She hammered her small fist against the leather seat, a useless, frantic gesture. I hate them! I hate him! Across from her, Damiano Marsetti said nothing. He did not move to comfort her. He did not shush her or offer platitudes. He simply sat, a dark, immovable presence, and watched her. He let her break. He let her feel the full, agonizing force of her pain. His stillness was its own kind of respect, an acknowledgement that her grief was too big to be smothered by easy words. When her sobs finally quieted, devolving into ragged, gasping breaths, she wiped her smeared face with the back of her hand. She looked at him, her eyes swollen and furious. "Where are you taking me?" she demanded, her voice hoarse. "Take me home. Let me go." He leaned forward just slightly, his presence filling the small space. His voice was quiet, but it was the voice from the church, the voice that did not brook argument. "No." The car sped on, leaving the city behind, heading toward the hills. They drove for nearly 2 hours. When the car finally stopped, it was in front of a house that looked more like a modern fortress, all stone, glass, and sharp angles, hidden deep within a forest of pines. He led her inside. The foyer was vast, cold, and silent. "This will be your room," he said, leading her down a hall and opening a door. The suite was larger than her entire apartment, a king-sized bed, a fireplace, a wall of glass looking out onto the dark woods. "No one will bother you here," he said. "Rest." He started to close the door, but stopped. On the nightstand, in a simple glass vase, was a small spray of white freesias, her favorite. The sight of them, that small, intimate detail, somehow broke her more than the insults had. He closed the door, the latch clicking shut with quiet finality. Isabel locked it. She stood in the center of the massive, empty room, swallowed by his jacket. She heard his footsteps retreat down the hall. She was alone, truly alone. She slid down the door, her legs giving out, and curled up on the plush rug, the full, crushing weight of the day, the whispers, the public execution, Julian's spineless abandonment, the terrifying rescue by a man she didn't know. It all came crashing down. She put her face in her hands and cried until her throat was raw and her body ached with emptiness. Outside in the hallway, Damiano Marsetti did not leave. He heard the muffled sound of her grief through the heavy wood. He leaned his back against the wall opposite her door, his watchman's post. He loosened his tie, his expression unreadable in the dim light. He sat down on the floor, his back against the wall, and waited. He sat there the whole night. Isabel woke to the abrasive glare of sunlight on unfamiliar hardwood. She was stiff, curled on the floor where she had collapsed, still tangled in the heavy wool of Damiano's jacket. The memory of the day before crashed down on her, a physical weight that made her gasp. The humiliation, Julian's cold, final turn, the sea of judging eyes. She forced herself to stand, her body aching. The room was silent. The only sound, the distant call of a bird outside the wall of glass. Her wedding dress, the borrowed, hateful thing, was gone. In its place, laid out on the foot of the massive bed with stark precision, were simple black trousers, a soft cashmere sweater in a deep ivy green, and new, packaged undergarments. His foresight was terrifying. It was not kindness, it was control. It was the act of a man who anticipated every move, who had already decided her reality. Rage, cold and sharp, cut through her grief. She dressed quickly. The clothes fit perfectly, a fact that only fueled her anger. She unlocked the door and stormed down the silent, polished hallway, following the scent of strong coffee. She found him in a vast kitchen that was more steel and stone than hearth. He stood by a commercial-grade espresso machine, a small, white cup in his hand, looking out the window at the dense pine forest. He wore a simple black Henley, the sleeves pushed up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and detailed with ink. He looked less like a boss and more like a laborer, yet the power rolling off him was undiluted. He did not turn as she entered, but he spoke. "There is food in the refrigerator. If you prefer something else, a cook will be here in an hour." "I don't want food," she said, her voice raw. "I want answers. What is this? Why did you do that? Who are you to claim me at the altar?" He turned then. His eyes were dark, patient. He took a sip of his espresso before answering, a small, deliberate act of power. "You know who I am. Isabel." "I know the name," she countered, marching closer. She would not be intimidated. She had nothing left to lose. "I know what they say. That doesn't explain why you interfered in my life. Why you humiliated me further by abducting me." "You were already humiliated," he stated, his voice flat, devoid of pity. "You were abandoned. I simply removed you from the theater. You had no right. You made it a spectacle." "They made it a spectacle," he corrected, his voice dropping. "I ended it." He set his cup down. "You asked why. I did it because I have been watching over you for 3 years, ever since the night you saved one of my men." Isabel froze. The anger faltered, replaced by a cold spike of confusion. "What? I don't know any of your men. I've never—" 3 years ago, a rainy Tuesday in November. You were closing your shop." The memory surfaced, hazy at first, then sharp. She'd been closing late, loading unsold bouquets into her van. She'd heard a groan from the alley. A man was slumped against the brick, bleeding heavily from his side, a ragged cut that looked like it came from a knife. He was young, terrified, and pressing a dirty rag to the wound. She hadn't thought. She hadn't called the police. In her neighborhood, calling the police was not always a solution. She had run back into her shop, grabbed her industrial first aid kit, a bottle of water, and clean towels. She'd knelt in the grime, cleaned the wound as best she could, and wrapped his ribs with tight, clean gauze. He'd stared at her, pale and shocked. She'd given him the water and left the kit. When she came back out, 10 minutes later, he was gone. "You were there," she whispered, horrified. "You saw that." "I saw it," Damiano confirmed. "I was in a car across the street, waiting for him. I saw you walk into the alley. I saw you choose to help a man you had no reason to trust. You showed a stranger a decency he did not deserve. You showed strength." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "So I watched. From a distance. I wanted to make sure that kind of light wasn't put out by the world." A chill that had nothing to do with the morning air ran down her spine. The flowers at the church, the white freesias in her room. This was not protection. It was stalking. "You've been watching me," she breathed, the realization sickening. "For 3 years. You watched me meet Julian. You watched me get engaged to a man." "A man who was weak," Damiano cut in, his voice hardening. "A pathetic, spineless creature who wanted you as a decoration. I watched you try to blend into a world that was designed to chew you up and spit you out. Men like Julian Vanderlei don't love Isabel. They acquire. And when their acquisitions become inconvenient, they discard them. He stepped closer. She instinctively stepped back, hitting the cold steel counter. "You're accusing him of being controlling?" She shot back, her voice trembling. "You've been spying on me. You know my favorite flowers. You know my size. This house. This is a prison." "It is not a prison," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "It is the safest place you have ever been. I did not control your life. I watched it. And when the inevitable happened, when the jackals you surrounded yourself with finally turned on you, I stepped in." He stood inches from her now. She had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You have a choice," he said. "You always have a choice with me. I am not Julian Vanderley." He held up one hand. "Choice 1. You leave. Right now. I will have Nico drive you anywhere you want to go. A new city. A new country. I will give you enough money to start over, anonymously, and I will personally ensure that the Vanderley family, and any other family, never ever speaks your name again. You will be a ghost. You will be free of them." He held up his other hand. "Choice 2. You stay here, under my protection. You rest, you recover your strength, and you decide what you want your next move to be. No one will find you. No one will touch you." Isabel stared at him, her mind racing. Both options were a cage of sorts. One was exile, the other was gilded captivity. But the thought of running, of being a ghost, made her stomach clench. It was what the Vanderleys wanted. "I won't run," she said. Her voice small but firm, a flicker of something, approval, maybe passed through his eyes. "But I am not your prisoner. Damiano, if I stay, it's for a few days, that is all. Just until I can think." "Fine," he said. He nodded toward the hallway. "Nico, the man who opened the car door. He will be with you when you are on the estate grounds. Do not leave the main house without him." "A bodyguard," she said bitterly. "A precaution," he replied. The next few days were a blur of disorientation. Isabel kept her word, staying within the house, which felt more like a sterile, sprawling museum than a home. Nico, a man of few words and a face carved from granite, was a constant, silent shadow whenever she stepped outside onto the manicured terraces. But as she explored, she found the cracks in Damiano's cold facade. The garden behind the house was not just a collection of expensive plants. It was a riot of deep purple peonies, white freesias, and pale blue delphiniums. Her favorites, the exact combination she used for her signature arrangements at the shop. In the library, a vast 2-story room, she found not just leather-bound classics, but an obscure, out-of-print volume of poetry she had once mentioned to a customer, lamenting that she could never find a copy. He'd been in her shop. He had listened. He had remembered. The knowledge was profoundly disturbing. But it was also touching. No one had ever paid such close, meticulous attention to her. Julian had barely remembered her birthday. Damiano Marsetti had catalogued her soul. On the third evening, the sky turned a sick, greenish black. The wind began to howl through the pines, a low, mournful sound. A storm was rolling in, fast and violent. Isabel stood in the living room, watching the trees bend. As the first crack of thunder split the sky, she flinched. The lights flickered. She'd always hated storms. It was a stupid, childish fear, born from being locked in a dark hall closet during a summer squall when she was 5, the smell of ozone, the pressurized silence before the thunder. It all sent her right back to that small, suffocating darkness. Crack boom! A bolt of lightning struck nearby, an almost simultaneous explosion of light and sound. The house's power grid died instantly. The lights went out. The ambient hum of the air conditioning ceased. Absolute darkness. Absolute silence, save for the roar of the wind and the slash of rain against the glass. "No," she whispered. Her breath caught. The walls were gone, replaced by the memory of the closet. She couldn't breathe. The air was too thick. She stumbled, hands outstretched, trying to find the hallway, the door, anything. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. Panic, cold and complete, seized her. She hit the hallway, tripped over a rug, and fell to her knees, a small, choked sob escaping her. A solid form collided with her in the dark. She cried out, striking blindly. "Isabel!" His voice, low, calm, cutting through the panic. Strong hands gripped her arms, hauling her to her feet. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't pause. He simply pulled her against him, his body a solid wall of heat. "You're safe," he rumbled, his voice close to her ear. One large hand wrapped around the back of her head, pressing her face firmly against the hard plane of his chest. His other arm circled her waist, holding her so tightly she was pinned to him. "I've got you. Just breathe with me. In, out." She was trembling violently, her fists bunched against his shirt. She could smell him. Clean soap, the faint trace of tobacco, and something uniquely, warmly male. She felt the steady, slow thump-thump of his heart beneath her ear. I can't," she gasped, the darkness pressing in. "Yes, you can," he commanded, but his voice was not harsh. It was a lifeline. "Breathe, Isabel. I am right here. Nothing will touch you." She clung to him, inhaling his scent, forcing her lungs to match the steady rhythm of his chest. The wind howled, but the sound was muffled by his proximity. The darkness was no longer empty. He was in it. Her panic, which had been a roaring fire, slowly receded to embers. She was still shaking, but she could breathe. And she realized, with a jolt that had nothing to do with the storm, that she felt safe. She, Isabel Russo, was standing in the dark, in the arms of one of the most dangerous men in the city, and she felt safer than she had ever felt in her life. Not with Julian, not even in her own apartment. Here. He held her for a long time, until the worst of the storm passed, his hand gently rubbing her back. He didn't let go, but guided her, still tucked against his side, into the main living area. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall. He released her only to retrieve a lighter from his pocket and ignite the kindling already laid. Within moments, a fire crackled to life, throwing warm, flickering light across the room. They sat on the thick rug, not on the sofa. He gave her space, but not much. He retrieved a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses from a cabinet. He poured 2 fingers in each and handed one to her. She took it, her hands still shaking slightly. The firelight caught the amber liquid and the planes of his face. He looked carved from shadow and flame. "Sorry," she murmured, staring into the fire. "It's a childhood thing. Stupid." "Fear isn't stupid," he said, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "It's just fear. It tells you where you're vulnerable." They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the diminishing rain. "You're not like them," she said quietly. "The Vanderleys. You're dangerous. Everyone knows it, but you're not cruel. Not in the same way." He looked at her, his eyes intense in the firelight. "They're cruel because they're weak. They hurt people to feel tall. I do what I do. For different reasons." "What reasons?" He took a slow drink. "When I was a kid, I watched people like the Vanderleys ruin my father. He was an honest man, a stonemason. He did a job for one of them. They decided not to pay. They bankrupted him, broke his spirit, just because they could." His voice was low, rough with memory. "I learned early that being good doesn't protect you. Being strong does. I built what I have so that no one could ever step on me or mine again. But you lose pieces of yourself. You lose people. Power always costs something." She looked at him, truly seeing the man, not the myth. The loneliness that clung to him was as palpable as his strength. Their hands were on the rug between them. His fingers brushed the back of her hand. It was the lightest touch, but it shot through her like the lightning. She looked from his hand to his face. His eyes were fixed on her, dark and intense. He wasn't moving, just watching, waiting. She was acting on an impulse she couldn't name. It was the safety she felt. It was the vulnerability he'd just shown her. It was the gratitude, the fear, and the strange. Electric pull she felt in his presence. She leaned in, slow, hesitant, and pressed her lips to his. It was uncertain, A question asked in the dark. His lips were firm, warm from the whiskey. He did not move for a beat, his body utterly still. Then, a low sound. Almost a groan rumbled in his chest. His hand, the one that had brushed hers, moved with slow deliberation, cupping the side of her jaw. His callous thumb brushed her cheekbone as he tilted her head. He deepened the kiss. It was not a collision, it was a claiming. It was not the sloppy, hurried kisses of Julian, but something deep and slow and hungry. It was years of watching, years of restraint, unraveling in a single, controlled motion. He tasted of whiskey and smoke and a profound, aching longing. Her other hand came up, gripping his shirt, holding on as the world tilted, her heart, which had hammered in fear, now hammered with a new, terrifying desire. He pulled her closer, his arm sliding around her waist, and the kiss became hotter, more demanding. It was too much, too fast, a fire catching on dry tinder. And then, just as she was losing herself in it, he stopped. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. His breathing was ragged, his eyes black in the firelight. Isabel was breathless, her lips tingling, her body alive with a need that shocked her. "Not tonight," he whispered, his voice rougher than she'd ever heard it. She looked at him, confused. He traced the outline of her lower lip with his thumb. "Not when you're still hurting. Not when you're broken from him. When I have you, Isabel, I will have all of you, not the pieces he left behind." He stood, pulling her gently to her feet. "Go to sleep. The power will be back by morning." Isabel walked back to her room on unsteady legs. She locked the door, but the gesture felt meaningless. She lay awake, the storm now a distant, soothing rumble. She touched her lips. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, but it was not the panic from the storm or the sting of yesterday's ruin. It was him. It was the terrifying, exhilarating realization that she was starting to feel something for the man she never, ever expected. For a week, Isabel lived in the eye of the storm. The estate was silent, beautiful, and utterly suffocating. The kiss by the fire had changed everything. The air between them was no longer just tense. It was charged, a live wire humming in the quiet hallways. He gave her space, but his presence was a constant weight. She ate the food he provided, wore the clothes that appeared in her closet, and felt herself disappearing again, just as she had with the Vanderleys. She woke on the 8th day with a hard, cold knot of certainty in her stomach. She could not hide here. She had to see her shop. It was the only piece of her that Julian hadn't touched, that Damiano didn't own. She found him in the library, a ledger open on the desk, the morning light glinting off his dark hair. "I'm going out," she announced, his head lifted, his eyes narrowing. "No, you're not. I'm not asking your permission. I'm going to my shop. I have to water the plants. I have to check the orders." It sounded pathetic, even to her. The plants have been watered, the orders have been canceled and refunded. Her blood ran cold. You went there?" "I sent someone," he corrected, his voice flat. "It's taken care of." "You had no right," she snapped, all her frustration boiling over. "That is my life, my business. You don't get to just manage it. I am going, with or without you." He stood slowly, his sighs filling the room. He studied her, the defiance in her posture, the tremor in her hands. He saw the crack in her composure and knew if he pushed, she would break or run. "Fine," he said, his voice clipped. "Nico will drive. I'm coming with you." The drive into the city was a silent, agonizing crawl. Damiano sat beside her, rigid and alert, his gaze sweeping every car, every pedestrian. He was a panther forced into a cage, and the city was a threat. Nico parked a block away from Bloom Bramble. "Stay in the car," Damiano ordered her. "I'll go first." "No," Isabel said, her hand already on the latch. "Together. It's my shop." He looked like he wanted to argue, to physically restrain her, but he just gave a sharp, frustrated nod. He got out, his hand inside his jacket, and scanned the street before opening her door. She smelled it before she saw it, the sharp chemical stench of spray paint and thinner. Her shop. Her little haven of light and life was destroyed. The large front window, where she'd always built such careful displays, was shattered. A spider web of broken glass held together by the lettering of her shop's name. But it was the paint that made her stop, her hand flying to her mouth. Someone had taken a can of cheap, bright red paint and slashed it across the facade, and the words, scrawled in black, were the same ones from the church. Trash, whore, gold digger, Isabel, don't look. Damiano's voice was a low growl. He tried to step in front of her, to shield her view, but she pushed past him. She fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't fit the key in the lock. He took them from her, his touch surprisingly gentle, and opened the door. The bell, which usually tinkled a cheerful welcome, was silent. Smashed on the floor, the inside was worse. It was a massacre of her life. Paint, red and black, was thrown over everything. The walls, the floors, the simple wooden counter she had built with her own hands, bags of expensive potting soil had been ripped open and scattered. Her delicate, carefully curated inventory of vases and pots was smashed to pieces, and the plants, her flowers, they were all dead. Ripped from their beds, drenched in paint thinner, their leaves blackened and wilted. It was a message, a petty, cruel, and cowardly message from the Vanderleys. They hadn't just insulted her, they had come back to stamp out the one thing she had built for herself. Isabel stood in the center of the ruin, breathing in the toxic fumes, and felt the last of her strength give way. She didn't cry. It was a cold, hollow emptiness. Beside her, Damiano went terrifyingly still. He was not breathing heavily. He was not yelling. He radiated a cold, lethal calm that was far more frightening than any shout. His hands were clenched at his sides, his knuckles white. His gaze swept the room, cataloging the slurs on the walls, the specific, personal nature of the destruction. "I will burn their house to the ground," he whispered. It was not a threat, it was a promise. "No," Isabel said, her voice hollow. He turned to her, his focus snapping back. "I will buy you a new shop. 10 new shops, this place. This is just wood and glass. I will have it gutted by noon and rebuilt in a week. Your inventory replaced. Tell me what you need." He was pulling out his phone, ready to make the calls, to erase this with the sheer, brutal force of his wealth. "No." This time, her voice was stronger. She looked at him, her eyes burning with a dry, cold anger she didn't know she possessed. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't just wood and glass. This is mine. They did this to me. I'm not running and I'm not letting you cover it up with your money. That's what they do. They break things and then pay to make them go away." She walked past him, through the debris, to the small back room. It was barely touched, save for a few stray splatters. Her cleaning supplies were still under the utility sink. She grabbed a bucket, a scrubbing brush, and a bottle of turpentine. She walked back out to the main room, knelt on the filthy, paint-soaked floor, and began to scrub the word whore from the wall. Damiano watched her. He watched her small, determined back, the useless motion of the brush against the thick paint. He saw the strength he had first witnessed in the alley, the stubborn light he'd sworn to protect. He saw that he had offered the wrong solution. He cursed, low and vicious, under his breath. Then, without a word, he unbuttoned his fine $1,000 suit jacket and folded it neatly, placing it on the one stool that hadn't been overturned. He rolled up the sleeves of his white shirt, past the tattoos on his forearms. He went to the back, found a heavy-duty paint scraper, and knelt beside her. They worked in silence for hours. The only sounds were the scrape of his tool against the drywall and the harsh, rhythmic shoosh-shoosh of her brush. It was hot, grueling, and suffocating work. The fumes were overwhelming. Nico appeared at some point, his face impassive, and left 2 large fans by the door and a case of bottled water. He said nothing and left them to it. The paint was stubborn. It stained their clothes, their skin, their hair. Isabel's knees were raw, her shoulders burning. Damiano worked with a relentless, focused energy, his methodical scraping tearing chunks of the wall away, the silence stretched, growing tighter, heavier. "You didn't have to stay," Isabel finally said, her voice rasping. "I don't need a keeper. I can clean up my own mess." Damiano didn't stop scraping. "Stop pretending you're not terrified. You were shaking when we walked in. You're still shaking." "I'm not terrified. I'm angry." She threw the brush into the dirty water, splashing them both. "And I am sick of you watching me, sick of you managing my life, anticipating my needs, deciding what I feel before I even feel it. You're smothering me. Damiano, just like they did, but in a different way." He stopped. He finally turned to look at her. His face was streaked with black paint, his eyes dark. "You're angry and you're scared," he said, his voice low. "There's no shame in it. They attacked you. They put their hands on your life. You think you're safe. You're not. Not without me. I was fine before I met you," she yelled, springing to her feet. "I was fine before the wedding. I was fine before you." He stood, too, towering over her. The proximity, the smell of sweat and turpentine, was overwhelming. "Were you?" he challenged her, his voice a quiet, lethal cut. "You were walking into a slaughter. You were marrying a coward who valued his mother's opinion over your dignity. You were making yourself small to fit into their tiny, cold world. You were not fine. You were just quiet about it." His words hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath, because it was true. She hadn't been fine. She had been lonely and compromising and slowly dying. The fight drained out of her, leaving her exposed, raw. They stood inches apart, both breathing hard, covered in the evidence of her humiliation. He saw the fight leave her, saw the vulnerability he had just exposed. His expression softened. Just a fraction. "You are the strongest woman I've ever met, Isabel, but you don't have to do this alone." He reached out, his hand rough, his fingers smudged with paint. He touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a stray tear she hadn't realized had fallen, smudging a speck of red paint near her temple. That small, grounding touch was the end of her control. She surged forward and kissed him. It was not the hesitant, questioning kiss from the storm. This was a collision. It was raw, desperate, and full of all the rage, fear, and grief she couldn't scrub from the walls. She gripped the front of his stained shirt, pulling him down, pouring every ounce of her violation and her desperate, confusing need for him into the kiss. He responded instantly. A low, possessive sound tore from his chest, his hands clamped onto her waist, lifting her effortlessly, and he backed her into the small, dark storage room, kicking the door shut behind them. He pressed her against a workbench, his mouth devouring hers. It was messy and urgent and tasted of salt and chemicals and a deep, coiling hunger. This was not a rescue. This was a claiming. It was the restraint of the past week, the tension of the long, silent hours. Finally snapping. He was so much bigger, so much stronger. He could have taken anything he wanted. Instead, he pulled back, just an inch. His forehead rested against hers, his breathing ragged, his eyes black and dilated, bored into hers. "Isabel," he whispered, his voice thick. "Are you sure? Tell me. Are you sure?" She looked at him, at this dangerous, terrifying man who had watched her, saved her, and now was offering her a choice when she felt she had none left. She didn't trust her voice. She just gripped the back of his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair, and pulled him back to her. Yes. The word was a sigh, an acceptance. That was all he needed. He lifted her, sitting her on the edge of the solid workbench. His hands were gentle, almost reverent, as they pushed the paint-stained sweater up, his calloused palms mapping the skin of her ribs, her back. She shuddered at his touch, a mix of fear and sharp, undeniable want. He moved slowly, deliberately, watching her face, reading every flicker of her eyelashes, every hitch in her breath. He kissed her again, deeply, his hands tracing the line of her jaw, her throat. He was giving her control, even as he was steadily taking it. His shirt was open from her pulling, and she saw them. Scars, a thin white line that ran from his collarbone, disappearing under his shirt, the puckered, raised skin of an old wound on his shoulder. These were the marks of his life, the one he had told her about by the fire. As he kissed her neck, sending shivers of heat down her spine. She leaned forward. She pressed her lips to the scar on his shoulder. She felt him freeze. She kissed the line on his collarbone, tasting the salt of his skin. It was an acceptance, an acknowledgement of his darkness, of the violence that shaped him. A ragged breath escaped him. It was his undoing. His control shattered. He said her name, a low, rough plea. His movements were no longer slow, but sure, deep, and overwhelming. She wrapped her legs around his waist, pulling him closer, meeting his intensity with her own. It was a firestorm, a desperate, frantic need to feel this, to feel alive and wanted and powerful, in the very place she had been made to feel worthless. It was the breaking of restraint, a surrender to the one person who saw her strength, not just her pain. Later, she did not know how much later. They were still in the back room. The air was thick and warm. She was breathing hard, her body humming with a feeling so intense it bordered on pain. He was still watching her, his expression raw, unmasked. He pulled her against his chest, her head fitting perfectly under his chin. He reached for his jacket, the one he had so carefully folded, and wrapped it around her shoulders, covering her. She sat on the bench, cocooned in his coat, in his scent. He stood before her, buttoning his stained shirt, the picture of a man reclaiming his control. "You scare me. Damiano," she whispered to the floor. He tensed, his hands stilling. She looked up, meeting his gaze. "But not the way they do. They scare me because I'm worthless to them. You scare me because I want you." His eyes held hers. He had no answer for that. The next morning, the fragile, charged peace between them was broken. They were back at the estate, sitting at the kitchen island, a silent, shared cup of coffee between them. Nico entered, his face grim. He didn't speak. He just placed a tablet on the counter in front of Damiano. Damiano read the screen. His entire body went rigid. "What is it?" Isabel asked, a knot of dread forming in her stomach. He slid the tablet to her. It was a news alert from a major city paper. "Julian Vanderlei files lawsuit, claims defamation, conspiracy in wake of wedding day, ambush." She read the lines, her blood turning to ice. Julian was suing her. He claimed she had conspired with Damiano Marsetti, a known criminal, to stage the wedding, humiliate him, and destroy his family's reputation for financial gain. He was painting himself as the victim. She felt sick. He's lying. How can he... Her first instinct was to flee. This was too much. She was bringing this danger, this public humiliation, to Damiano's door. "I have to go," she said, standing up, her chair scraping loudly. "I have to disappear. I can't... I'm putting you in danger. No." His voice was steel. He grabbed her wrist, not hard, but with an authority that stopped her cold. "You will not. If you run, they win. They paint you as the guilty one, and they walk away clean. We don't run." "But what can we do?" she cried, desperate. "He's Julian Vanderlei. He has a team of lawyers. I'm a florist with a vandalized shop. They'll destroy me." "You're not," Damiano said, pulling her to face him. "You're the woman who walked out of that church with me. And you are the woman who scrubbed the paint off the walls." He looked at her, his mind clearly working. The strategist, the boss, taking over. "They want to play a game in the press," he said, his voice cold. "We will play it better. They want to talk about reputation. We will give them one." "What are you talking about?" "We announce our engagement, publicly. Today." She stared at him, stunned. "A fake engagement. You want me to lie to the entire world?" "It's not a lie," he said, his grip on her wrist softening, his thumb brushing her skin. "It's a reframe. They called you trash. I will call you my future wife. They tried to make you small. I will make you untouchable. Let them try to sue the fiancé of Damiano Marsetti. Let's see how brave Julian is then. This gives you power. Isabel. It gives you protection." She hesitated, her mind reeling. It was a cage. It was another performance, another man defining her life. But this time it felt different. It felt like a shield. "I'll do it," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "On one condition." He waited, his eyes unblinking. I am not a prop. I am not a puppet you move around to win your game. I am your partner in this, or I am nothing. If I say no to something, if I tell you a line is too far, you listen to me. You actually listen." He looked at her for a long, heavy moment, a flicker of genuine respect in his dark eyes. "You have my word." Damiano Marsetti did not just announce their engagement, he orchestrated it. Julian's lawsuit, a pathetic attempt to reclaim his narrative, had dissolved in less than 12 hours. Withdrawn with a quiet, panicked press release citing a misunderstanding, the media, sniffing blood in the water, went into a frenzy. The annual museum benefit gala was the chosen stage. It was the heart of the city's elite, the very same vipers who had watched Isabel's humiliation at the church. This time, she was not in a borrowed white dress. The dress Damiano had waiting for her was not a request, it was a statement. It was velvet, the color of deep, arterial blood. It was cut low, clinging to every curve, with a slit that ran daringly high up her thigh. It was not a dress for a shrinking victim. It was a dress for a queen. When she descended the staircase at the estate, Damiano was waiting at the bottom. He was in a tuxedo so black it seemed to drink the light. He went utterly still. His eyes traveled from her hair, which she had left down, a dark wave over one shoulder, to the hem of the dress, and back to her face. He said nothing, but his sharp intake of breath was louder than any compliment. "It's armor," she said, her voice steady. "It's a declaration," he corrected, his voice rough. He held out a black velvet box. Inside, on a bed of silk, was a necklace. It was not a delicate chain. It was a cascade of dark, glittering diamonds, heavy and magnificent. As he fastened it around her neck, his fingers, warm and calloused, brushed her skin. The necklace was cold, a beautiful, possessive weight. "They will have no doubt who you belong to," he murmured, his lips near her ear. "They will have no doubt who I am," she countered quietly. A flicker of respect, dark and hot, lit his eyes. He took her hand, placing it in the crook of his arm. "Let's go." The moment they entered the grand ballroom, a wave of silence rolled through the vast space. It was not the silence of the church, it was the silence of fear, awe, and ravenous curiosity. The whispers followed them like a physical wake. Isabel Russo, the humiliated florist, and Damiano Marsetti, the man who owned the city's shadows. She kept her head high, her hand steady on his arm. She could feel the heat of his body, the coiled power beneath the fine wool. He guided them through the sea of faces, his gaze forward, his presence a shield. He stopped in the center of the room, by the main fountain. He flagged down a waiter, took 2 glasses of champagne, and handed one to her. He raised his glass, not to her, but to the crowd that was pretending not to watch. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice carrying easily. Cutting through the music, the orchestra faltered, then stopped. Every eye was on them. "I wanted to share a moment with you all." He turned, his dark eyes finding Isabel's. He lifted her hand, the one without the glass, and brought it to his lips, his gaze never leaving hers. "To my fiancée, Isabel Russo." The collective gasp was audible. Cameras, previously forbidden, began to flash from the edges of the room. The news exploded. Isabel Russo, once trash, now the future bride of the most powerful and feared man in the city. Well, the voice was like acid. Isabel tensed. Damiano's body went rigid. Matilda Vanderlei stood before them, her face a mask of pinched reptilian fury. Beside her, Julian looked pale and ill, his eyes darting everywhere but at Isabel. "You clean up nicely, dear," Matilda sneered, her eyes raking over the red dress with disdain. "It seems you landed on your feet, or perhaps your back. Tell me, Mr. Marsetti, is the price of this one higher than the last?" Isabel's hand tightened on her glass, but before she could speak, Damiano moved. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move fast. He simply shifted his weight, shielding Isabel slightly with his body. He leaned in toward Matilda, a predator's smile gracing his lips. It did not touch his eyes. "Matilda," he said, his voice a soft, cultured whisper that was infinitely more terrifying than a shout. Say one more word about her. One. And I will not just destroy your family's reputation. I will erase the name Vanderlei from every building, every bank account, and every headstone in this city. I will ensure the only nothing anyone remembers is what you became. Do you understand me?" Matilda's face went white. The blood drained from her expression, leaving her looking old and brittle. She tried to speak, but only a small, choked sound emerged. Julian, seeing his mother threatened, finally found his voice, thin and reedy. "You can't talk to her like that. We have—" Isabel stepped out from behind Damiano. She looked at Julian, the man she had almost married, the man who had left her to be torn apart. She felt nothing, no anger, no pain, just a vast, cold pity. "You have nothing, Julian," she said, her voice clear and steady, silencing the whispers around them. She wasn't speaking to him, or even to Matilda. She was speaking to the entire room. "You were right, Matilda," Isabel said, turning to the older woman. "I do come from nothing. I come from a working-class neighborhood, from dirt and hard work. But that means every single thing I have, I built, I earned." She met the woman's gaze. "My dignity isn't something I inherited, like a trust fund or a string of pearls. It's something I chose. It's something I forged. It cannot be taken by insults, and it cannot be bought." She finally turned her full attention to her former fiancé. His eyes were wide, panicked. "You," she said, her voice soft but sharp as a shard of glass. "You had everything. A name, a family, wealth, power, and you chose to have nothing, no spine, no courage, no honor. You stood there and let your mother call me trash. But you were the one who proved to be disposable." She held his gaze. "You're right. I was never worthy of your family. I am, and have always been, worth so much more." She did not wait for a reply. She turned, took a sip of her champagne, and looked at Damiano. "I believe you promised me a dance." He stared at her, the cold menace in his face replaced by a raw, burning pride. He put his hand on the small of her back and led her to the dance floor, leaving the Vanderleis standing like statues in their wake. That night, back at the estate, the adrenaline of the gala faded, leaving a different kind of tension. The pretense, the fake engagement, had been burned away by the reality of the night. He had defended her. She had defended herself. They were a united front. They stood in his bedroom, a vast masculine space of dark woods and cool gray. The diamond necklace was on the dresser. She had taken it off, the weight of it suddenly too much. "It didn't feel fake tonight," she said, her voice quiet. He was standing by the window, his tie and jacket gone, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He turned to face her. "It was never fake. Isabel." He crossed the room in 2 strides. He did not grab her, as he had in the shop. He did not hold her like a lifeline, as he had in the storm. He stopped just before her, his hands finding her waist, his touch gentle, questioning. "They're gone," he said, his voice low. "The Vanderleis. They will never touch you again. You are free of them." "Am I?" she asked, her hands resting on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Or did I just trade one cage for another?" His expression hardened. "Is that what this is? A cage?" "I don't know," she whispered, and it was the truth. "It's you. At the gala, you were terrifying, and then you looked at me, and I've never felt safer. What you make me feel, Damiano." "It scares me. You scare me," he admitted, his voice a rough gravel. He leaned his forehead against hers. "You walk into a room of vipers and you cut them to pieces with nothing but words. You are not meant for a cage. Isabel, you are meant for this." He kissed her. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of the flower shop. It was slow. It was deep. It was a conscious, deliberate act of vulnerability. His lips were soft, patient, asking rather than taking. He lifted her, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, her arms locking around his neck. He carried her to the bed and laid her down, following, his body partially covering hers. He looked down at her, his eyes dark with a need that went far beyond the physical. "I am not Julian," he whispered. as if sealing the promise. "I know," she breathed, their fingers laced together on the pillow beside her head. He moved slowly, his eyes locked with hers, watching every micro-expression, every flicker of emotion. It was a silent conversation, a mapping of boundaries and desires. He kissed her eyes, her temples, the line of her jaw, his touch almost reverent. It was a slow, deep, and vulnerable union, built on whispers of need and the silent promises of two damaged souls finding a foothold. It was not a collision, it was a surrender. The next few weeks were a fragile peace. The media frenzy died down, replaced by a grudging, fearful respect. Isabel's shop was rebuilt. Damiano had provided the best contractors, but she was there every day, directing, painting, ordering new stock. It was her sanctuary, and she was reclaiming it. But the world Damiano lived in was not the world of petty socialites. It had real monsters. He was in his office. The door closed, but his voice was audible, harder than she had ever heard it, and he was not speaking English. The name Gallo Moretti was repeated, like a curse. He emerged an hour later, his face carved from stone. "What's wrong?" she asked. He hesitated, his instinct to shield her warring with his promise to be her partner. "A rival," he said finally. "Gallo Moretti. He leads an older, more traditional family. He doesn't like my way of doing things, and he does not like my public profile." "My profile," she corrected, understanding immediately. "He sees this engagement, our arrangement, as a distraction. He sees you as a weakness, a vulnerability he can exploit." A cold dread settled in her stomach. This was not Matilda Vanderlei. This was a man like Damiano. The proof came 2 days later. Isabel was at the shop, arranging a display of white lilies. Nico was outside, as he always was, sitting in the black sedan, his presence a silent, looming protection. A nondescript gray van pulled up. 2 men got out. They were not vandals. They were professionals. They moved quickly. One heading for the front door, the other for the back alley. Isabel's heart leaped into her throat. She fumbled for her phone. But Nico was already moving. He was out of the car, a blur of motion. The man at the front door reached inside his jacket, but Nico was faster. There was a sickening, solid sound. The man dropped. The second man, hearing the commotion, came running from the alley, but Nico intercepted him, slamming him against the brick wall of the shop. It was over in 10 seconds. It was brutal, efficient, and terrifyingly quiet. Isabel was shaking. Lilies scattered at her feet. Nico looked at her through the glass, his expression grim. He nodded once, a sign that she was safe, before securing the men. When Damiano arrived, his tires screeching, he was not the calm, controlled strategist. He was a storm. He burst into the shop, his eyes wild, and grabbed her, pulling her into an embrace so tight it hurt. He buried his face in her hair, his whole body trembling with a rage she had never seen. "You're safe," he whispered, over and over, more to himself than to her. That night, the fight came. "You are not going back to the shop," he declared. He was pacing the living room, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. "It's over. I'm doubling the guards at the estate. You are not to leave the grounds without my explicit permission." Isabel stared at him. The cold dread from before was replaced by a hot, furious betrayal. "A cage," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "It is protection. Isabel," he roared, slamming the glass on the table. "They tried to take you. This is not a game. This is not Julian. These men will not stop." "And you will not stop me," she shouted back, springing from the sofa. "I just got my life back. I will not be your prisoner. I will not be a porcelain doll you hide on a shelf. Damiano, I refuse. You would rather be dead? You would rather I let them take you? I would rather I be your partner, the one you promised, the one who faced down Matilda. I am not a weakness. Don't you dare treat me like one." She was so angry, so hurt, she couldn't breathe the same air. She shoved past him, yanked open the terrace doors, and stormed out into the night. A storm was breaking. The wind was high, and a cold, driving rain was beginning to fall. She didn't care. She stalked into the garden, the one he had planted for her, and wrapped her arms around herself, glaring into the dark, turbulent woods. The door slid open behind her. He followed, his shirt already plastering to his chest. "Go back inside," he commanded. "No, I will not be ordered around. Not by you. Not by anyone." He grabbed her arm, spinning her to face him. The rain was pouring now, sluicing through her hair, stinging her face. "Isabel, look at me," he pleaded, his voice raw, all the anger gone, replaced by a deep, aching fear. "I have lost. I cannot lose you. I cannot—" She saw it then. His past, the people he'd lost. His control was not about caging her. It was about managing his own terror. "I know," she said, her voice breaking, tears mixing with the rain. "But I am losing myself. Don't you see? If you lock me up, Moretti wins. He has made me a weakness. He has taken me from you. I will not live in fear." He stared at her, the water dripping from his jaw. He was torn between his protective instinct and her fierce independence. "I love you," she cried, "and I will not be the thing that breaks you, but I will not be the thing you hide either." He pulled her to him, his hands sliding from her arms to cup her face, his thumbs wiping away the rain and tears. The storm raged around them, a mirror of the conflict that had almost torn them apart. "I will protect you," he vowed, his voice thick with emotion. "I will surround you with men. I will burn the world down to keep you safe." He paused, his eyes desperate. "But I will never cage you. I swear it, Isabel. We do this together, my way and your way, but together, together," she breathed, a sob of relief. He kissed her. He kissed her in the rain, in the middle of the storm, a raw, desperate, and sealing kiss. It was not the heat of the shop or the vulnerability of their bed. It was a promise, a covenant, forged in the heart of the tempest. The promise made in the rain was a fragile one, holding back a tide of violence that together they had agreed upon was immediately put to the test. Gallo Moretti did not care for their covenants. The pressure did not just build, it began to strangle. Moretti, a man from an older, more brutal school of thought, saw Damiano's public devotion as a sickness. In his world, women were property, kept quiet and in the dark. Damiano had put Isabel on a throne, and Moretti saw it as the perfect target. He began to squeeze. A shipment of Damiano's went missing at the docks. A restaurant under Damiano's protection was firebombed. They were tests, pokes at the bear. Damiano responded with his own cold, precise force, but he was distracted. His focus was split between his empire and the woman who had become its center. Isabel felt the shift, the house, which had started to feel like a home, now felt like a fortress again. The number of guards doubled. Nico, once her shadow, was now just one of 5. Damiano was distant, his nights spent in his office, his voice a low, angry growl on the phone. The man who had held her by the fire was gone, replaced by the boss. One night, she couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet. She went downstairs to find him, needing the simple, grounding reassurance of his touch. His office door was ajar. Just a crack. She heard voices. Nico was in there with him. "He's not bluffing, dammy," Nico said, his voice grim. "He wants a war. He says the old families are with him. They think you're weak. He's an old man blowing smoke." Damiano's voice was sharp, tired. "He gave us an out, a way to stop it before it starts. There is no out." "He said," Nico paused, and Isabel's blood went cold. "Hand over the girl." Silence, a thick, suffocating silence that seemed to last an eternity. Isabel pressed her hand to her mouth, her heart stopping. "He wants Isabel?" Damiano's voice was barely a whisper, but it was more lethal than any shout. A peace offering. His words, "He says you disrespected the old ways, bringing a nobody into the business. He says, give her to him, and he'll let you walk away from this. He'll call off the families. He just wants to make an example of her, to show that you know your place." Isabel felt the bile rise in her throat. She was a thing, a bargaining chip, a peace offering. She waited, her entire body shaking, for Damiano's explosion, for him to rage, to vow to kill Moretti. Instead, the silence stretched. "Dammy?" Nico prompted, his voice uncertain. "Get out, Nico," Damiano said, his voice flat, dead. "What are you—" "Get out!" Isabel heard the door open and shut. She was alone in the hall. He hadn't said no, and he hadn't immediately said no. He had been quiet, and he was thinking. He was considering. The betrayal was a physical blow, sharper than any of Mathilde Vanderley's insults. He had promised to protect her, but he was a boss first, and a boss, she realized, made sacrifices. She was the acceptable loss. She turned and fled back to her room, the sound of her own blood roaring in her ears. She'd been a fool, a naive, stupid fool, falling for a man who lived by a code she could never understand. He had promised her a partnership, but in the end, she was just leverage. She packed a single bag, her movements frantic, clumsy. She took the green cashmere sweater he had first given her and a few other small things. She found a pen and a piece of the estate's thick, cream-colored stationery. You don't have to choose. I won't be your weakness. I won't be the reason you go to war. I'm setting you free. She left the note on the pillow. She didn't know how she would get past the guards, but as she reached the bottom of the main staircase, she saw her chance. A supply truck was making a late-night delivery to the kitchens. The guards were waving it through the main gate. She slipped out the side door, her heart hammering, and hid in the deep shadows of the pines. As the truck rumbled past her toward the service entrance, she ran. She ran faster than she had ever run in her life, her small bag banging against her side. She didn't stop until she hit the main road, 2 miles away. She flagged down the first pair of headlights she saw, a trucker who looked at her, wild-eyed and desperate, and thankfully mistook her for a woman running from a simple fight. He dropped her at a bus station in the city. She bought a one-way ticket to a town she'd never heard of, 2 states over, and paid in cash. When Damiano found the note, the world tilted. The paper in his hand felt like acid. "No," he whispered. The word was a prayer, a denial. He roared her name, a raw animal sound of pure panic that brought guards running from every corner of the house. Find her now! He lost control. He swept the lamp from his desk, sending it crashing against the wall. He tore his office apart, looking for, he didn't even know what, a clue, a sign, anything. The man who never lost his composure, who managed every variable, was gone. He saw her everywhere. He remembered standing in the back of her shop, years ago, pretending to browse. She'd been humming, her hands a blur as she tied a ribbon, a small smudge of dirt on her nose. He remembered the look on her face when she'd kissed his scars, a look of such profound, gentle acceptance it had nearly broken him. She was the light. She was the one, single, decent thing in his violent, dark world, and now, because of him, she was gone. He remembered his silence when Nico had delivered Moretti's terms. He hadn't been considering it. He had been visualizing the 10 different ways he was going to kill Gallo Moretti for even thinking her name. But she hadn't heard that. She had heard his silence, and she had run. Not from him, he realized with a fresh wave of agony, but for him, I will burn this city to the ground until I find her, he vowed to the empty room. Isabel felt hollow. She had found a room in a cheap, weekly rate motel off a highway. The sign outside buzzed, a sickly neon pink. She got a job at a small, struggling flower shop on the town's main street. The owner, a kind, elderly woman named Martha, had hired her on the spot, grateful for her skilled hands. She called herself Anna. She cut her hair, a jagged, uneven chop with scissors from the motel desk, leaving it shoulder-length and unrecognizable. For 2 weeks, she worked. She arranged flowers. She went back to her empty room. She ate toast and instant soup. She was free. No guards, no Vanderleys, no mafia bosses. She was just Anna. And she had never been more heartbroken in her life. She missed him. She missed his scent, his quiet strength, the safety she felt in his arms. She missed the man who had scrubbed paint off her walls. She was locking up the shop one evening, the sky a bruised purple. Martha had already left, a dark sedan, just like the ones at the estate, pulled up to the curb. Her heart stopped. She thought, for one wild, joyful second, that it was him. The man who stepped out was not Damiano. He was older, with a silver pompadour and a cruel, thin-lipped smile. He was flanked by 2 other men. "Isabel Russo," he said. It was not a question. "You have been a very difficult woman to find. My name is Gallo Moretti, and you and I have an appointment." She didn't run. She knew, with a sickening certainty. It was useless. They took her, one man on each arm, and pushed her into the back of the car. The message to Damiano was not a phone call. It was a package. A single white freesia, identical to the ones he had put in her room, and a cell phone. When he answered, Moretti's voice was slick with triumph. "You've been looking for your stray, Marcetti. I found her. She looks a little thin." Damiano's vision went red. "If you have touched one hair on her, she is, for the moment, unharmed," Moretti interrupted. "A testament to my good manners, but her health is temporary. You want her back? You come and get her. The old shipyard, warehouse 4. You come alone. You come unarmed. You have 1 hour. If I see Nico, if I see one car, if I see one man, she dies." The line went dead. Nico stood beside him. "It's a trap. It's an execution. You know it. Let me take the team. We can—" "No." Damiano's voice was absolute. He was already shrugging out of his jacket, removing the gun from his waistband and placing it on the table. He took off his watch, emptied his pockets. "Dammy, don't do this," Nico pleaded, his face ashen. "This is what he wants. He's using her. You go in there. You die. And she dies anyway. Let me—" "If she dies knowing I was coming for her," Damiano said, his voice raw. He walked to the door, unarmed, alone. "If I am not back in 2 hours, burn his entire world to the ground." The warehouse stank of salt, rust, and fish. Isabel was tied to a steel chair in the center of a vast, empty space. Moretti sat on a crate a few feet away, sipping from a small flask, enjoying himself. "He's not coming, you know," Moretti said conversationally. "He's a smart man. He'll cut his losses. You were a bad investment. Cara mia, a pretty distraction, but in the end, just a girl from the gutter." "You're wrong," Isabel whispered, her teeth chattering from fear and cold. "Am I?" Moretti smiled. Just then, the massive, corrugated metal door of the warehouse slid open with a screech. A single figure stood silhouetted against the dim harbor lights. Damiano. He was alone. His hands were raised, open, showing he was unarmed. Well, Moretti said, genuinely surprised. "The fool." Damiano walked slowly into the warehouse. His eyes locked on Isabel. He saw the bruise on her cheek, the terror in her eyes. His gaze was a physical promise. "I am here." "You came. Marcetti. You really came." Moretti chuckled, standing. "I'm touched. All for this? She must be very special." "Let her go, Gallo," Damiano said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. He stopped 20 feet away. "Oh, I will. But we have a trade to make. You and I— an exchange." Moretti's second in command, a large, brutal-looking man, stepped out of the shadows, pressing the barrel of a gun to Isabel's temple. Isabel squeezed her eyes shut, a tear leaking out. "Damiano, no, don't. A life for a life," Moretti said. "You, for her. A fair trade, no?" "Let her walk out," Damiano said. "You have my word. I will not move. I will not fight. Let her go, and you can have what you came for." Moretti considered this. He nodded. "Untie her. Let her go." The large man cut the ropes from Isabel's wrists. "Get up. Walk to him. Slowly." Isabel stumbled to her feet, her legs numb. She looked at Damiano, her heart breaking. "No, I won't. I won't leave you." "Go, Isabel," Damiano commanded, his voice soft, but with an iron will beneath it. "It's okay. Go." She walked toward him, her body shaking. He did not move, his hands still raised. She was halfway across the floor when Moretti's man grabbed her arm again, yanking her back and spinning her around, putting the gun back to her head. "A change of plans," Moretti sighed. "I think I'll kill her in front of you. Then I will kill you. It's cleaner." Moretti's man smiled, cocking the hammer. He was too focused on Damiano. He didn't see the gun on his own hip, the one tucked into his belt, the man who had grabbed her from the shop. The one Nico had slammed against the wall was there too. He had a gun, but it was at his side, hanging loosely. Damiano saw it. Moretti's man was looking at Damiano, waiting for the order. Damiano gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Now. Isabel did not know what it meant, but she saw the shift. Moretti's second in command, the one holding her, saw it too. He shoved Isabel to the ground and raised his gun toward Damiano. "No!" Isabel screamed. As she fell, her hand hit the ankle of the other man, the one with the gun hanging at his side. He stumbled, surprised. His gun, which had been loose, clattered from his holster and skittered across the concrete floor, stopping just inches from her hand. Moretti's man fired at Damiano. Damiano dove, the bullet sparking where he'd been standing. Everything happened in 1 second. Isabel grabbed the gun. It was heavy, cold. She didn't think. She didn't aim. She just pointed it at the man who had shoved her, the man who was now raising his gun to shoot Damiano again. She pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening. The kickback slammed her shoulder. The man holding the gun to Damiano gasped, a red flower blooming on his chest. He looked down, confused, and crumpled. A firefight erupted. Moretti roared, firing wildly. Damiano, now armed with the gun from the man Isabel had shot, returned fire. He grabbed Isabel, hauling her to her feet, and shoved her behind a stack of metal barrels. Bullets pinged and ricocheted. "Stay down," he roared at her. He moved with a deadly, fluid grace she had never seen. He was not the tender man who had held her. He was a killer. The fight was short, brutal, and loud. When the echoes died, there was silence. Damiano was breathing heavily, his gun still raised. Moretti and his men were down. Damiano ran to her, his face a mask of terror and relief. He dropped his gun, his hands grabbing her, checking her for wounds. "Are you hit? Are you hurt? Isabel, talk to me." She was shaking, the smell of gunpowder thick in her throat. "No, I killed him. Oh, God, Damiano, He pulled her into his arms, crushing her to his chest. "You're alive," he whispered, his voice thick, his body trembling. "You're alive." He bundled her out of the warehouse, into the car he had hidden a mile down the road, and drove. He didn't take her to the estate. He took her to a small, nondescript apartment, a safe house she never knew existed. He poured her a glass of water, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the glass. She sat on the small sofa, wrapped in a blanket, and the adrenaline finally faded, leaving a cold, horrifying clarity. She started to sob, deep, body-racking cries. "I left," she choked, the words tearing out of her. "I left to save you, to stop the war, and I brought it right to you. You almost died. I almost got you killed." He knelt in front of her. His face was streaked with grime, his eyes raw with an emotion so powerful it stunned her. He cupped her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "Isabel, look at me." She met his gaze. "You are the only thing in this world," he said, his voice breaking, "worth dying for." The safe house was a limbo of silence and antiseptic. For 3 days, Isabel did not speak. She sat wrapped in a blanket, staring at the wall, the deafening echo of the gunshot still ringing in her ears. She had taken a life. The fact of it was a cold, heavy stone in her stomach. Damiano never left her side. He did not push. He did not pry. He sat in a chair across the small room, watching her, his presence a solid, silent anchor. He brought her food she didn't eat and water she barely sipped. He simply stayed. He was her watchman again, sitting outside the door of her trauma. On the 4th day, she finally looked at him. His face was drawn, dark circles under his eyes. He looked as broken as she felt. "I heard you," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. He was instantly alert, moving to kneel in front of her. "What, Mia Cara, what did you hear?" "In the office, with Nico. When he said, Moretti's terms," his face tightened, a flicker of the old, cold fury. "Isabel, you were silent," she continued, her voice trembling. I thought you were considering it. I thought I was a piece in your game, a peace offering." He closed his eyes, a pained sound escaping his throat. He took her hands, his grip desperate. "No, never. I was silent because in that second, I was deciding how I was going to kill him. I was deciding if I should skin him alive or just put a bullet in his head. I never, for 1 second considered it. that you thought I would. That is my failure, not yours. I ran, she whispered, to save you. You ran, and you took my entire world with you, he said, his voice thick. Do not do it again. You are not my weakness, Isabel. You are my spine. That was the turning point. The healing began. Slowly, the media, of course, had exploded. Moretti's accidental death in a warehouse fire, along with his top associates, was the official story. But the whispers were different. Isabel Russo, the florist who had been publicly humiliated, was now a figure of mystery and power. She was the woman Damiano Marsetti had crossed a line for. She was brave. She was dangerous. She was, to some, a hero. Isabel wanted none of it. She wanted peace. When they finally returned to the estate, it was different. The security was still there, an iron ring, but it felt different. It was protecting them, not caging her. Damiano was lighter. The constant crushing weight of his underworld had shifted. The near loss of her had clarified something he had been fighting for years. He found her in the garden one evening, a month after the warehouse. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and fiery orange. She was kneeling in the dirt, planting new peonies, her hands covered in soil. She was finally reclaiming the simple things. He didn't make a sound, but she knew he was there. It's beautiful, she said, not looking up. The quiet. I never thought I'd feel it again. He came to stand beside her, looking out over the trees. I have something for you. She wiped her hands on her jeans and stood, turning to face him. He was not on one knee. He was not holding a speech. He looked nervous, his hands in his pockets. It was the most human she had ever seen him. The first time I asked you to be my bride, he began, his voice low, it was for them. Despite the Vanderleys, it was about protection and power and revenge. He took a step closer, his eyes intense. The second time, at the gala. It was for the world. It was a strategy, a shield, a statement to men like Moretti. He took a small black velvet box from his pocket. It was not a ring box. It was slightly larger. This time, he said, his voice rough with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. This is just for me, and for you. I am not asking you to be my fiancé. I am asking you to be my wife, to be my partner, my equal, my heir. I love you, Isabel. I loved you from the moment I saw you in that alley. I was just too much of a coward to admit it. He opened the box. Inside, on a bed of black silk, was a ring. It was not a simple diamond. It was a stunning, intricate piece of art, a band of what looked like dark, woven thorns made of platinum, and in the center, instead of a stone, was a single perfect rose, its petals studded with tiny, blood-red rubies, a single clear diamond at its heart, like a drop of dew. It was her. A rose blooming from the thorns. Tears streamed down her face. She was not crying for the pain or the past. She was crying for this. Damiano, she breathed. Say yes. Isabel, he whispered, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Say yes, and I will spend the rest of my life making you feel as safe as you made me feel in that warehouse. You were my courage. Now let me be your peace. She launched herself into his arms, her muddy hands gripping his shirt, and kissed him. Yes, yes, 1,000 times. Yes. He slid the ring onto her finger. It was heavy, a solid, tangible promise. She looked at it, then up at his face, her expression turning serious. Damiano, she said, her voice quiet but firm, can we be normal somehow? Can we just be us, without all of that? He held her gaze, understanding her question perfectly. She was not just asking about the violence, she was asking about the life. Yes, he said, his voice absolute. I am. The next day, he met with Nico. It was not a long meeting. It's yours, Damiano said, sliding a set of keys and a thick leather ledger across his desk. Nico stared at him. What? What is? All of it. The shipments, the restaurants, the unions, the protection, the day-to-day. It's your business now. You've earned it. You will run it, and you will report to me once a month. I am stepping down. Nico was stunned. Dami, you can't. This is your life. Your father's. My father is dead, Damiano said, his voice void of emotion. And I almost died in a warehouse full of fish. My life is upstairs, digging in the dirt. I am choosing her. Fully, I am building something with her. I am done tearing things down. His new life began not with a bang, but with a business proposal. He found Isabel in the greenhouse, sketching designs. Bloom bramble, he said, sitting across from her. She looked up, wary. What about it? I want to invest, he said, placing a formal portfolio on the table. Not as your fiancé, as your partner. I want to build an empire with you, Isabel, a legitimate one. You have the talent, the vision, I have the capital and the logistics. Russo Marsetti Designs. We can franchise. We can take on the biggest hotels, the city galas. We can be bigger than the Vanderleys ever dreamed of being. She looked at the portfolio, then at his face. He was not saving her. He was not buying her. He was joining her. A slow, brilliant smile spread across her face. I think I'd like that. Their wedding day was nothing like the first one. It was held in the garden at the estate, under a clear, bright autumn sky. There was no cathedral, no ancient stone, no crowd of vipers. Isabel stood at the top of the grassy aisle, not in a borrowed dress of shame, but in a gown she had designed herself. It was simple, silk, and the color of antique ivory. It was strong, elegant, and entirely her. Her abusive family was not invited. As she began to walk, she looked at the pews. They were filled with their family. In the front row sat Nico, his face rigid, but his eyes suspiciously red. Beside him sat Martha, the elderly woman who had given Anna a job, flown in and treated like royalty. The pews were filled with Damiano's men, the rough, dangerous guards who now looked at her with a fierce, protective reverence. They were in suits, looking awkward and proud. Her friends from the old flower market were there, weeping openly. It was a congregation of survivors. At the end of the aisle, Damiano waited. He was not in black. He wore a deep charcoal gray suit, his face open, vulnerable, his eyes only on her. When she reached him, he did not take her hand. He took both of them, his grip warm and steady. The vows were not the standard ones. They were words they had written themselves, whispered only to each other. You are my light in the alley, he vowed, his voice thick. You are my anchor in the storm. I am yours. Completely. You were my shield in the church, she whispered back, tears on her lashes. You were my partner in the fire. I am yours. I choose you. When they kissed, it was not a performance for a crowd. It was a deep, searing, and profound promise. It was the sealing of two broken halves into a new, stronger whole. It was not a ceremony. It was a rebirth. The reception was loud, joyful, and full of laughter. Men who had only ever known violence were dancing awkwardly with florists, and Martha was teaching Nico how to line dance. Later, as the stars came out, bright and sharp in the clean country air, Damiano pulled Isabel away. He led her to a high balcony overlooking the party, the sound of music and laughter, a soft hum below them. He put his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her head, her back pressed against his chest. They stood in silence for a long time, just breathing together. Is this normal enough for you? He murmured into her hair. She smiled, leaning her head back against his shoulder. It's more. He turned her in his arms to face him. He needed to see her eyes. I will never stop protecting you. Isabel, I know, she said, her hands coming up to cup his face, her new ring glinting in the starlight. And I will never stop protecting you. He pulled her close, and they began to dance, slowly, to the music only they could hear. They were surrounded by the quiet night, their world finally, truly at peace. Isabel looked up at the man holding her. The Mafia boss, the killer, the gardener, her partner, her husband. This time, she whispered, her voice full of a quiet, unshakable power. I chose my groom, and I chose right. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We truly hope you enjoyed the journey of Isabel and Damiano. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment and let us know. If you love stories like this, make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories so you never miss a new chapter. And finally, we want to hear your thoughts. What did you think of the story? Let us know in the comments in English. We read every single one,